As a lifelong Windows PC user, this is the first time I have ever bought a brand new Mac. My 2020 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro has been my daily driver for about a week now, so here are my thoughts and some things I've noticed thus far. Am I a Mac convert? Let's dig in. I was very careful how I worded the intro. I am not a Windows fanboy, nor is my brand new 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro my first experience with Mac.
Back in my day,
we had a class in school called Computer Lab. My very first experience with computers were with Apple IIs. However, our first computer at home was a 486 Packard Bell with Windows 3.1 and later Windows 95. From there, almost all of my personal computing has been on Windows machines. My experience with Macs was quite limited. When I went to school for audio engineering, however, virtually every professional recording studio exclusively relied, and still relies, on Macs. Mostly because at the time, Mac OS was the only operating system DigiDesign Pro Tools was compatible with. Now it's Avid Pro Tools. So whenever I was in a recording studio, I was using a Mac, but really only within Pro Tools itself. I didn't do much else within Mac OS. Moving the story along a few years, somewhere around 2012, I bought an old iMac off of Craigslist, mainly out of curiosity. It was a 32-bit Core 2 Duo and was virtually useless. I used it for maybe 2 hours total and gave it away. As we move along to present day, I have had a handful of iPhones and iPads, but never a dedicated daily driver Mac. That all changed about a week ago. I had been on the fence about getting a Mac for years, just waiting for the right time to make the investment. With the announcement of Apple-based silicon in the form of the ARM-based M1 processor, I decided now was the best time to take the plunge. So I hopped in my car and headed for Micro Center. After a conversation with my beautiful wife, of course. Macs aren't cheap, and we just had a baby, and I work in radio. Anyway, I pulled up to Micro Center like it was Christmas Day. This is the perfect segue to my first thought: price. My major criticism of Apple over the years has been the relatively low value to performance ratio. In a nutshell, until the M1, spending $1,000 on a Windows PC typically netted a much more powerful machine than $1,000 on a Mac. For instance, $1,000 on a PC could get you a CPU with 4 cores or more and a beefy mid-range dedicated GPU for gaming and content creation. $1,000 on the Mac side of things would typically get you a wheezing dual-core with integrated Intel graphics. You were paying the so-called Apple tax for a better experience. Which is fine, don't get me wrong. No beef with that. People can spend their money however they want. Now, fast-forwarding a little bit, the M1, in my opinion, has dramatically increased Mac's performance to value proposition. With the waterfall of benchmarks and reviews we've seen over the past few weeks, it is clear as day that the M1 is a beast in nearly all regards, and I wouldn't disagree with that. From gaming to content creation, and still this is mostly under Rosetta 2 emulation cases. In other words, while gaming benchmarks are impressive under emulation, things can only get better once these games and applications are recoded natively for the M1. To paint a clearer picture of this performance to value argument, the cheapest M1 Mac right now is the Mac Mini for about $700. This $700 Mac is curb-stomping i9 monster rigs costing many times more. Now, I am not saying you can't build a great PC for $700. I'm just saying that $700 with a Mac goes a lot further with performance now than it did even a few months ago. Weeks, for that matter, as of recording. Moving on from my value observation, I want to talk about what I've noticed in my day-to-day experience. I know some of these are observations, but they still might help a few of you, so stay tuned. I don't gatekeep noobs. We're all noobs at first. I don't want to beat the I/O argument to death. That horse died years ago with Mac, but the current M1 MacBook Pro only has 2 Thunderbolt ports. I knew this going into it. Dongle life is real. But I do want to talk about charging for a moment. I've noticed some tomfoolery and some coolness. First, the tomfoolery. Maybe it's just my dongle, but daisy chaining power through the dongle at least temporarily bamboozles the current version of Mac OS Big Sur to see 100% battery. Eventually, the battery software catches itself and goes back down to where it was, but it's weird plugging in and instantly seeing 100% battery. Again, just something minor I've noticed. Could just be an isolated case with my particular setup. The next thing I've noticed is something that maybe some of you already know, but I didn't. I'm showing you in case there are others who might not have known. I've noticed that she'll take a charge from every charger I've tried thus far. I thought Apple would be much stricter about compatible chargers. The OEM charger works great, of course, but so does this smaller Type-C brick that came with my first generation GPD Pocket. I've even tried a 5-volt 2-amp phone charger and it works. Obviously, I have to note that the charging speed depends on the charger's output. For instance, the phone charger can't keep up with a MacBook while it's on. But it's cool to know I can turn off my MacBook and have it charge slowly in a pinch if all that's available is a Type-C phone charger. Moving on. I thought I wouldn't like the touch bar, and that remains true. I don't care for the touch bar. I wish there was an option for normal function keys. I've accidentally touched the touch bar, sounds weird, at least three times typing this script. I only use it to adjust volume and brightness because it is slightly faster than using the control menu. Controlling those settings with function keys would be faster, but whatever. It looks cool. Maybe I'll find a use for it in my workflow, but I'm not holding my breath. It's there, and it's functionally meh. For me, at least.
I decided on the MacBook Pro over the Air for the improved microphone and speakers, but mostly the microphone. Apple says that the microphone is studio quality on the MacBook Pro. Now, let me tell you something. Studio quality means absolutely nothing. It's just marketing nonsense. In a recording studio, we'll use everything from a garbage $10 toy microphone to a $500,000 modded Neumann U47. Whatever gets the artist the sound they want for that particular take. I will say, however, that the microphone built into the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro is on par with a $50 to $100 USB small diaphragm condenser. That doesn't sound like much, but that's actually huge praise for a built-in laptop mic. Matter of fact, you've been listening to it for the last paragraph. The main microphone is under the left speaker grill, and my mouth is about 4 inches away, off axis.
Now back to the microphone I've been using for this voiceover, which happens to be a production industry standard Electro Voice RE27N/D, a few inches from my mouth, just out of shot here. The speakers on the 13-inch MacBook Pro M1 are amazing. I've heard some say that they prefer the more pronounced treble of the MacBook Air, but for audio geeks, balance is key. The Pro has a much more even frequency response according to Apple, and improved dynamic range. And having listened to them for the past week, I tend to believe them. These speakers sound great for a laptop. Making podcasts, radio shows, and music on the go was hugely important to me. The audio for this video was actually entirely mixed using the MacBook Pro's built-in speakers. No headphones, no fancy recording studio Mackie HR824 audio monitors, just the speakers built into the MacBook Pro. Now, as far as audio production software, I've been using Reaper flawlessly. But some of you will be happy to know that Pro Tools works perfectly under Rosetta 2 as well. I was not expecting that. Now, my preferred DAW, Cakewalk Sonar, is not available on Mac. Moving on to video editing, I typically use Vegas on my PC. But since it's not available on Mac, I've finally taken the dive into learning DaVinci Resolve. This video is actually my first full-length attempt in Resolve, and of course it's all been done on this M1 MacBook Pro. Performance in DaVinci Resolve is nothing short of amazing, especially considering as of now, it's still being emulated under Rosetta 2. While I'm only working with 1080p video, there are no shortage of reviews marveling at how well the M1 handles 4K and even some 8K codecs. The only chugging I've experienced is working with Fusion effects, both in editing and export. I imagine this will only get better once Resolve goes native to the Apple M1 Silicon. So let's keep this going. Nobody buys a Mac strictly for gaming, but let's talk about it anyways. In short, the M1 is like sorcery for frame rates. Most games run buttery smooth, even at or near 60 frames per second at very high settings. For instance, I've cranked 𝒔𝒊𝒕𝒄𝒉𝒆𝒅 and it plays gloriously. I'm not going to spend much time on gaming, but I will mention that Rocket League runs great. However, it of course is limited to local play through Steam, as it has long since abandoned network support for Mac. I've never heard other reviewers mention that. Maybe they do, I just haven't seen every review ever. Now, you can play Rocket League with network play through Steam through Crossover, but it is graphically glitchy and has no controller support as of now. So if you're a wizard that plays Rocket League with a mouse and keyboard, go for it. Now on to retro video game emulation. It runs flawlessly with OpenEMU, which is a bit of a mind bender when you consider that OpenEMU itself is emulated through Rosetta 2. The emulators are running through an emulator. It's crazy. PSP runs perfectly with PPSSPP, but one of the only gripes with retro gaming on Mac is the glaring lack of quality PS2 emulation. Getting PS2 emulators to work on Mac through Wine and other types of emulation is flaky and cumbersome at best. I tried for 3 hours today and just gave up. I'll admit that one of the biggest pains going to Mac as a daily driver is lack of gaming support. Your Steam library is a fraction of what it is on PC. That's no surprise. For instance, for me, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 is life. It's a huge bummer not having it on my Mac. Anyways, playing remotely from my gaming PC through Steam works great in a pinch for casual games like Flight Simulator. However, there are too many network variables to suggest remote play for competitive games like Rocket League. Speaking of remote play, please Apple and Valve, please bring official Steam Link support to Mac OS. Right now, not even the iOS versions work in Big Sur on the M1. Now, the rest of my observations are relatively inconsequential, having to do with rewiring my brain in terms of short circuits. Take two. Now, the rest of my observations are relatively inconsequential, having to do with rewiring my brain in terms of shortcuts and keystroke differences between Mac and Windows. I'm still getting up to speed on that. Things like toggling full screen being Alt-Enter in Windows by default and being Control-Command-F by default in Mac OS. It's just stuff like that. So, does me going out and diving headfirst into a MacBook Pro mean I've ditched Windows? Will I be putting Apple stickers on the back of my Bolt EV and turn into an anti-PC fanboy? Of course not. Fanboyism is ridiculous and short-sighted. Mac OS is not better than Windows, and Windows is not better than Mac OS. Debate amongst yourselves in the comments. Mac OS, to me, just does things pleasantly different than Windows, and vice versa. Windows does things pleasantly different than Mac OS. As with anything, it just depends on what you need, and to a certain extent, merely what you want. If every bit of software you depend on is on Mac, and you don't game, by all means, get a Mac. As for me, I will never ditch Windows. I need it for gaming, and almost every other computer I use in my daily life is running Windows 10, even Windows 3.1 on my old 286. The biggest reason I bought a Mac is because, frankly, I'm just a huge geek. Look how freaking thick my glasses are. I wanted to witness firsthand the shakeup in personal computing ushered in by Apple switching to ARM from x86, x64. This is a huge moment in computing history. The switch from CISC to RISC in a mainstream computer manufacturer is nothing short of a paradigm shift that will cause many other players in the industry to follow suit. Apple switching to ARM means that we are that much closer to a truly unified software experience. Our phones already run on ARM. They have for years. Imagine when more and more desktop software is coded for ARM. Imagine that desktop software being available in your pocket to stream wirelessly to any nearby TV or computer monitor. I bought an M1 Mac to be on the ground floor of what is promising to be a very, very fascinating decade in personal computing. Thank you for watching. You are loved and valuable. Search for the Geek Therapy Radio podcast in your favorite podcast app and just look for the red, white, and black color scheme. I hope you enjoyed this video. Take care.